The Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt in the 1st century BC was a realm of immense wealth, cultural brilliance, and deepening political instability. Its ruler, Ptolemy XII, Theopater, Philadelphus Neos Dionysos, more commonly known as Auletes, the flute player, sat precariously on a throne once held by titans of history. His reign, which began in 80 BC, was characterized not by military conquest or wise governance, but by a desperate and costly struggle to maintain power. Auletes was widely viewed as a weak and self-indulgent ruler, more interested in his artistic pursuits and lavish festivals than in the affairs of state. His legitimacy was questionable, and his survival depended heavily on the whim of the rising power across the Mediterranean, Rome or Dwight. He spent enormous sums of Egyptian wealth, bribing Roman senators and generals to secure official recognition of his kingship. This policy of appeasement and financial hemorrhage made him deeply unpopular among the proud and volatile citizens of Alexandria. The people saw their kingdom's treasury being drained to satisfy the greed of a foreign power, all to keep a despised king on his throne. Auletes' foreign policy was one of complete subservience to Rome, a strategy that would ultimately prove to be his undoing. He passively stood by as Rome extended its influence, annexing territories that were once firmly within the Ptolemaic sphere. The breaking point came in 58 BC. Rome, citing the will of a former king, moved to formally annex the island of Cyprus, a long-held Ptolemaic possession. The king of Cyprus, Ptolemy XII's own brother, was deposed and committed suicide rather than face the humiliation of Roman conquest. Ptolemy XII did nothing. His inaction in the face of this familial and national disgrace was the final insult to the people of Alexandria. The city, a tinderbox of resentment, exploded in open revolt. Fearing for his life, Ptolemy XII Auletes fled Egypt in disgrace, a king without a kingdom. He set sail for Rome, the very heart of the power he had so desperately courted, now as a beggar seeking restoration. Back in Alexandria, the throne did not remain empty for long. The Alexandrians, asserting their right to choose their monarch, turned to the king's family. They proclaimed his eldest daughter, Berenice Fort, as their new queen. However, she would not rule alone, at least not initially. By her side, the people placed a woman known as Cleopatra Tryphaena. The precise identity of this Cleopatra Tryphaena is a subject of historical debate, a ghost in the Ptolemaic narrative. Some scholars believe she was Cleopatra Tryphaena, the wife of the exiled Ptolemy XII and mother of Berenice IV et al. If this is true, it represents a mother-daughter duo taking the reins of a kingdom in crisis. Other historians suggest she was an elder sister to Berenice, a previously unmentioned daughter of Auletes named Cleopatra Sixta Tryphaena. Regardless of her exact lineage, Cleopatra Tryphaena shared the throne of Egypt with Berenice IV. Their joint reign marked a sharp break from the policies of the deposed Auletes. They represented a return to native Egyptian sentiment and a rejection of total subservience to Rome. The dual monarchy had to immediately grapple with the immense challenge of governing. They needed to consolidate their power, manage the kingdom's finances, and guard against the inevitable return of Ptolemy XII. The court in Alexandria would have been a nest of intrigue, with factions forming around the two queens. Cleopatra Tryphaena, likely the elder and more experienced, may have acted as a guiding force for the younger Berenice. Their primary objective was to secure international recognition and fend off Roman intervention. They knew that their father was in Rome, actively plotting his comeback with the most powerful men in the world. The joint rule, however, was destined to be short-lived. In 57 BC, just a year after taking power, Cleopatra Tryphaena disappears from the historical record. Most historians believe she died, though the circumstances of her death are unknown. Whether from natural causes or courtly intrigue, her sudden absence left Berenice IV as the sole ruler of Egypt. Now a young woman in her early 20s, Berenice IV held the fate of a great kingdom in her hands. As a lone female ruler, her position was precarious. She was pressured by her advisors to marry and secure the dynasty. A suitable husband would need to be a co-ruler, a king to share her throne. Her first choice was a Seleucid prince, but he was quickly dismissed and possibly strangled, allegedly for his boorish manners. She then married Archelaus, a high priest from Cappadocia who claimed to be a son of the great Mithridates VI of Pontus. This marriage brought a degree of stability to her reign, but the shadow of her father loomed ever larger. Meanwhile, in Rome, Ptolemaic XII Auletes was relentlessly pursuing his goal of restoration. He had incurred massive debts, promising fortunes to Roman creditors and politicians in exchange for their support. His chief supporter was the powerful Roman proconsul of Syria, Aulus Gabinius. Auletes offered Gabinius the staggering sum of 10,000 talents to lead a Roman army into Egypt and restore him to power. Despite a Sibylline oracle forbidding Roman military intervention in Egypt, the bribe was too tempting to ignore. In the spring of 55 BC, Gabinius, with Ptolemaic XII in tow, marched his legions towards the Egyptian border. The Roman force was formidable, a professional war machine against the Ptolemaic army, which had been neglected for years. Archelaus, Berenice's husband and co-ruler, led the Egyptian forces to meet the invasion. The ensuing battles were decisive. The Roman legions, battle-hardened and expertly led, crushed the Ptolemaic resistance. Archelaus was killed in the fighting, leaving Berenice IV defenseless. The gates of Alexandria were opened to the conquering army and the returning king. Ptolemaic XII's first act upon regaining his throne was to exact a terrible revenge. He ordered the execution of his own daughter, Berenice IV, the queen who had dared to replace him. The brief, defiant reign that had begun with two queens, Cleopatra Tryphaena and Berenice IV, ended in bloodshed. Ptolemy XII also initiated a bloody purge of the wealthiest citizens of Alexandria who had supported his daughter's rule. He did this to confiscate their fortunes and pay back his enormous debt to Gabinius and his other Roman creditors. The Ptolemaic power struggle had come full circle, ending with the restored king ruling as a mere puppet of Rome. He left a garrison of Roman soldiers, the Gabiniani, in Alexandria to protect his throne, a constant reminder of his dependency. The reign of Cleopatra Tryphaena, though brief and shrouded in mystery, represented a final, fleeting moment of Egyptian resistance to Roman domination. Her story, and that of her daughter Berenice, serves as a dramatic prelude to the reign of her other, far more famous daughter. Ptolemy XII would rule for another 4 years, his kingdom effectively a Roman protectorate. Upon his death in 51 BC, he would leave the throne to his 10-year-old son, Ptolemy XIII, and his 18-year-old daughter, Cleopatra VII. The cycle of Ptolemaic power struggles, sibling rivalry, and Roman entanglement was set to begin anew, on an even grander and more tragic scale. The initial rebellion against Auletes was fueled by years of economic hardship imposed by his heavy taxes. The citizens of Alexandria, a proud mix of Greek and Egyptian heritage, possessed a fierce, independent streak. When Auletes fled, the power vacuum was filled with an air of revolutionary fervor. The choice of Berenice IV and Cleopatra Tryphaena was a deliberate statement against their father's failed regime. Their early actions likely included attempts to restore the depleted national treasury. They would have sent envoys to other Hellenistic kingdoms, seeking alliances against Roman encroachment. The death of Cleopatra Tryphaena in 57 BC created a new crisis for the young government. Berenice, now alone, had to prove she was capable of ruling a kingdom known for its cutthroat politics. Her search for a husband was not a matter of romance, but of pure political survival. The brief and disastrous marriage to the Seleucid prince demonstrated the difficulty of finding a suitable partner. Archelaus, a second husband, seemed a more promising choice, bringing with him a claim of noble ancestry and military experience. Together, they tried to build a defense against the inevitable Roman-backed invasion. In Rome, Ptolemy XII was a pathetic but persistent figure, haunting the houses of powerful Romans. He leveraged every connection and promised any price to win back his throne. The decision by Gabinius to intervene was illegal under Roman law, a testament to the power of Auletes' bribes. The Roman army's advance was swift and brutal, a display of overwhelming military superiority. The defeat of the Ptolemaic army was not just a military loss, but a deep psychological blow to Egyptian pride. The restoration of Ptolemy XII was not a moment of celebration, but one of fear and subjugation. The execution of Berenice IV was a brutal message to any who would defy the king or his Roman masters. The subsequent proscriptions filled the king's coffers, but created a legacy of hatred and mistrust. The Gabiniani, the Roman garrison, became a source of constant friction with the local population. Ptolemy XII's remaining years were spent as a caretaker of a kingdom that was no longer truly his own. The story of Cleopatra Tryphaena's brief co-rule is a poignant chapter in the decline of Ptolemaic sovereignty. It highlights the internal decay and external pressures that were tearing the kingdom apart. The power struggle was a family affair, pitting father against daughter, brother against brother. The wealth of Egypt, once a source of its power, became the lure that drew in its conquerors. Berenice's defiance, though ultimately futile, was a bold stand for independence. Her death marked the end of any real hope for a Ptolemaic dynasty free from Roman control. The stage was now set for Cleopatra VII, who had witnessed this entire tragedy as a child. She would learn from her father's mistakes and her sister's fate. She would not try to defy Rome with force, but would instead attempt to conquer it from within. The reign of Cleopatra Tryphaena and the tragedy of Berenice IV were the harsh lessons that shaped the last great queen of Egypt. The political climate in Alexandria was always turbulent, a sea of shifting loyalties. Auletes' devotion to the cult of Dionysus was seen by many as a sign of his decadence. The loss of Cyprus was not just a territorial loss. It was a profound blow to Ptolemaic prestige. The Alexandrian mob was a powerful political force, capable of making or breaking kings. Berenice IV was initially popular, seen as a native-born savior of the kingdom. The co-rule with Cleopatra Tryphaena may have been a compromise between different court factions. Their government likely faced immediate financial crisis due to Auletes' empty treasury. The mysterious death of Cleopatra Tryphaena remains one of the period's great unsolved questions. Berenice's sole reign was a constant battle against internal plots and external threats. Auletes in Rome was a master of political theater, presenting himself as a wronged victim. The immense bribe promised to Gabinius was equivalent to several years of Egypt's total revenue. The Roman invasion force included cavalry led by a young and ambitious officer named Mark Antony. The fall of Alexandria was swift, its defenses proving no match for Roman seegercraft. The restoration of Auletes marked the definitive end of Egypt as an independent kingdom. The legacy of this struggle was a deep-seated bitterness towards Rome among the Egyptian people. This entire episode demonstrated the corruption and ambition that characterized the late Roman Republic. The story of these two queens is a testament to the agency of women in a world dominated by men. Their ultimate failure was not due to a lack of will, but to the overwhelming power of Rome. The echoes of this conflict would resonate through the lives of Caesar, Pompey, Antony, and Cleopatra Tryphaena. The Alexandrian Library, a beacon of knowledge, stood as a silent witness to the unfolding drama. Trade routes that had enriched the Ptolemies for centuries were now effectively controlled by Roman interests. The religious establishment in Egypt, once a pillar of the throne, was forced to accommodate the new reality of Roman power. Berenice's reign, though brief, was a period of renewed hope for many Egyptians. The court of elites had been notorious for its Greek extravagance, alienating the native Egyptian population. Cleopatra Tryphaena's presence may have been intended to add a sense of maturity and legitimacy to the new government. The news of elites lobbying in Rome would have been a constant source of anxiety in the Alexandrian palace. The failure to find a strong, loyal, and acceptable royal husband was a critical weakness for Berenice. Archelaus, despite his bravery, was ultimately outmaneuvered by the seasoned Roman commanders. The return of Auletes was a grim affair, his face hardened by years of exile and plotting. The Gabiniani soldiers, left as a gift from Rome, behaved more like occupiers than protectors. The final years of Ptolemy XII's reign were quiet, the quiet of a kingdom holding its breath. The power struggle between 58 and 55 BC was a microcosm of the end of the Hellenistic age. It was the story of an ancient dynasty collapsing under the weight of its own internal conflicts and the irresistible rise of a new empire.